if you're not feeling sexy, you're probably not going to want to have sex either. So finding ways to feel sexy, turn yourself on, including period panties. Get yourself a little sexy, silky period panty to prance around in.
Mine weren't sexy, bro.
The rest of the outfit that you described, though, damn. All right, everyone, it is episode time. It is interview time. And we are here with Jordan Donnell from Vaginas, Vulvas, and Vibrators, the podcast, and also the human. And I just love a good iteration. I love like the VVV, shameless sex, the SS, and also pure pleasure, PP. At first, when we came up with pure pleasure, by the way, I was like, is PP problematic because of like, P and PP. But anyways, I love that, like how it rolls off the tongue. I love the work that you do, Jordan. And our listeners have already heard a little bit about you in the bio, just a smidge. But can you please still tell us and our listeners a little bit more about how you got to where you are today in the field of sexuality?
Yeah, absolutely. So my journey started a long time ago when I was actually in high school. Maybe even younger than that. I was always the friend that my girlfriends went to talk about sex with. If they needed somebody to go with them for plan B, if they needed somebody to go with them to talk about birth control options, STI testing, all of that, like I was the girl. And I was doing school projects at that age related to STIs. Like that's what always intrigued me. And so fast forward, I actually started selling sex toys for a while and learned a lot through that process and really just enjoyed talking about sex. So continue going on. I go to PA school. I start learning more about the women's bodies and how they work. In particular, that's always been an interest of mine. And what I started doing is doing Facebook Lives with my community, who I was selling sex toys to, all about understanding how female bodies worked. And what I was learning is when we talk about endometriosis and PCOS and all of these things, so often we're not taught about the basic things when it comes to a menstruating individual's body, how the menstrual cycle works, like none of these basics that are so fundamental for understanding and being empowered. And so then one thing led to another, and I ended up with a podcast, and I always wanted a way out of medicine because medicine's great, but I wanted to really get into coaching. And so that's how it kind of all led into place.
I think that's a great story. The triple V. Yes, the triple V.
Your hands can't even do it, April. You just try it, but you only have two hands. I'll do it. If you're not watching YouTube, we got triple V up in here.
Oh yeah, I should have done another V. I didn't think about it. I felt like my head was a V. My V was in the middle of the V. Get it? Okay. Ooh. So, yeah. That's a great story. I didn't realize that your background came from this place of need, because of course a lot of things do. And I didn't know that you had an experience or a lot of years in experience with sex toys. I had no idea, which I guess that comes with the vibrator part. But yeah, did you mostly just work with vulva owners throughout that experience? Okay, got it.
Yep, primarily.
Can we learn more about this vibrator part? I don't even know if this is in our questions.
It's not.
Yeah.
It's not.
Yeah, tell us about the sex toy part.
Yeah. So it was a in-home party planning company that I worked for. And I did that for 11 years. Honestly, it was amazing. It helped support me through PA school and made so many connections, and really is what fed my desire to do what I do now. And so I'm thankful that I had that opportunity in my life. But it was so fun to go into women's homes and talk about this, talk about our bodies, talk about pleasure, talk about like how to just make it more fun and how to try new things and just, I don't know, stay turned on. And so it was a great experience.
It's like the Tupperware parties, but it's fuckerware. It's like,
yes.
I'm going to bring you some fuckerware home. Okay, well, that's cool. Thank you. It is fun, especially in people's homes where they feel comfortable. People can get a little scared when they're at sex shops because you're like overwhelmed. And I really have a deep respect for all the folks out there doing the home party businesses or that have done those. And now you're in this world, which I love, because this first question is sort of geared towards something that there can be shame around, right? So we know, I mean, us three here, I know we know, at least I know, I don't want to speak for everyone, but I'm pretty sure because I know Amy well, and I have a feeling, Jordan, you talk about this. Thanks. So we have to normalize that sometimes, no matter what gender you are, people don't want to have sex every day, sometimes not even every week. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, right? So can we start with the many reasons or a few reasons why people might not be interested in having sex with their partners? And I'm going to say period sex might be one of them, but let's go whatever route you want to.
Yeah. So I wanted to kind of start from a medical standpoint because I do have kind of that medical background. And I think that so often when we think about, I'm not interested in sex, it's something is wrong with me. And if you go to the doctor, very often they kind of brush it off like, oh, well, have some wine. I think when we did a podcast together, we were talking about this, but it's like, oh, have some wine or, just bear through it. Just figure it out. But the reality is, from a medical standpoint, there are some things that could actually be going on that are impacting your libido. So, for instance, low testosterone for everybody across the board. My main job, I actually work in infertility. And one of the things that we test a lot of times is testosterone. And when I see that it's low, I often ask them, like, what's your sex drive like? And the partner will look at them and they look at me and they're like, oh, I never thought about it, but I'm really not interested. And it's just such an interesting component that so often we're not looking at. We know that low testosterone in individuals that have penises is commonly associated with decreased desire. But low testosterone is one, thyroid issues is another. That can also impact your desire. Anemia can impact your desire. When we get into other medical conditions, high blood pressure, that affects erectile quality and can also have kind of an impact on that if you have nerve damage. So anything that involves your nerves, diabetes, fibromyalgia, different nerve conditions, if you're taking any medications for your nerves, that can have an impact. When you look at medications, SSRIs or antidepressants, anti-anxiety medication, most common side effect is anorgasmia. But often when you start that medication, nobody tells you that. And then if you bring it up to them, often I see that it's kind of, again, oh, well, that's just the side effect, do you want your anxiety or do you want to come? And sometimes, you have to be very honest that these are not necessarily normal things that you just have to suffer through. Some other medication, birth control. I remember when I was on birth control personally, it literally took away my desire. And I did not realize how suppressed that was until I stopped it. And all of a sudden, I was like, I had the desire to fuck again. And I was like, oh, well, hello, nice to meet you. And so there's so many different things that impact that. On the note of like birth control and menstruation, throughout our menstrual cycles, there are different hormones that are involved there as well that can impact that. So for some people, different parts of your cycles, you're going to have less desire. And let's talk about period sex too. And that sometimes, like if you're on your period, maybe you don't feel so good, right? You're maybe feeling bloated. You're not interested in having sex because you're bleeding. And like, that's just not on your to-do list or your priority list at that time.
Yeah, and then so those are a lot of the physical aspects, or like with pharmaceuticals, or the Western medical system, and I think we're kind of focusing a lot about this, and also we'll talk about period sex, everyone, and also want to acknowledge mismatched libidos can be also a disconnection in the relationship, right? Like ruptures in the relationship, not feeling seen or understood, or you have 3 kids, or maybe you have 1 kid. You just had a baby 2 months ago and you're not horny, and that's totally fine. And we're also, this episode's not just designed just for pussy owners too, right? It's designed for the whole shebang, right? But I don't really want to have sex, or I don't have or want to have a lot of sex with my partner is very common even outside of medications and the physical body, right?
Yep. Yeah. And I think that so often we overlook the medical side, and there is a lot more education information about like the physical or like those types of things and mismatched libidos. And a lot of times too, if you look at like your chore list, if you have a long chore list, the last thing you want to do is have sex. If you you have laundry that needs to be folded and it's all over the bed and everything's messy, you're not going to want to have sex.
Oh my God, April would never be horny at all if there was laundry all over the bed. She would be like, no, focus on putting all the things away right now.
I would
then.
be mortified. No.
Yeah.
Hard no.
Yeah. Well, and then also stress.
Yeah.
Stress is a huge mood killer for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get hard on yourself if you are stressed out because you think about, I'm so stressed out. It might help if I masturbate. It might help if I have sex with my partner, but I'm just so irritated with everything around me in life and I don't know how to deal with it. I'm just going to numb out with Netflix or numb out with a glass of wine or numb out with going to bed right now, some Advil PM, who knows? People have various ways. And I respect that. And at the same time, it's something to look at because sex can also be a really great way to get out some of the stresses of life, at least if you can drop into it. But no pressure for anyone. Pressure sucks.
And with that, I think so. Like we've said this 5 million times in the podcast, exaggeration, but like probably hundreds, right? Like sex doesn't have to be penetrative sex, and we're not just speaking to like heterosexual couples, right? Like sex can just be intimacy, right? Like maybe I have a low libido, but we still find time to connect or something that is outside of us having, you touching my genitals, sex, and there's so many reasons why this can happen. So let's bring it to this next question then. So when it comes to mismatched libidos, what would, and this could be broad, this could include what you're talking about, like the physical body, which is, I think, fairly valid, like hormones and the medications you're on, to also the emotional stuff or the relational stuff. When it comes to mismatched libidos, what are your top tips for couples or thruples or whomever you're having sex with and working together to find ways to meet each other's sexual wants and desires as best as they can while still tending to your own?
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest tips that I have for this is, first of all, learning how to turn yourself on and seducing yourself. Self-seduction is huge. And I don't think that we do it enough, right? And we put a lot of pressure on maybe our partners to turn us on, or maybe we don't know what we need. So maybe we haven't recognized that we need the house cleaned before we have sex, or that we need some downtime. Maybe we need a bubble bath. We need to set the mood. So spending some time recognizing what are some things that you need to help you be in the mood. And so cultivating that, maybe look at your last positive sexual encounters that you had and see, like, what do these have in common? What can I take from here to utilize to help? The other thing that, like you pointed out, is kind of redefine sex. Sex is not just penetration. So how can you connect with somebody? How can you create intimacy without it being about having penetrative sex? And how can you create that experience? Like maybe it's more just like sensation play sometimes, and you're just exploring and learning and spending time together. Maybe you're having deep emotional or intimate conversations. So really just finding other ways to connect outside of sex.
It's so true. I love this because it's like not all about penetrative sex, right? And that's 100% true. I just had a really intimate experience with my partner on my period the other day. Told Amy about this. I think we might have talked about it on a podcast because of my period panties. And we just like got down.
I
we
love
got
this
down,
story. It's on a past podcast, so we don't get to this story, but I love it. Yeah. I love it.
Because I was trying to bring sexy back to myself with the period panties, and our desires sometimes don't match up. And he was down, and I was like, no, I have my period, but I want to make this sexy. So I love that. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but it was a pause. And I was like,
penetrative sex though. You like basically seduced him with your period panties and some tall red boots and made out for a while. And
we
that's
made
awesome.
out, and it was just, we didn't even touch. I mean, I kind of touched his cock a little bit. I think maybe I sucked it for a minute, but it was just like mostly making out, and it was hot. We touched each other's bodies and just like worshiped each other. It was really nice.
Yes. Worship is such a huge thing that's underutilized. Like worshiping each other can be so intimate. The other thing I was going to mention was seduction, or not seduction, scheduled sex. So often scheduled sex, or scheduled intimacy, as I like to call it, gets this kind of like this gray cloud over it, right? And a lot of times people say, oh, then it's too structured, it's too rigid, there's not flow or flexibility. But if you're scheduling intimacy, it helps prioritize the relationship. And it helps, especially if you're having mismatched libidos, it helps you just create time and space for each other. And a lot of people need that intimacy in order to have any desire to have sex. And so when you create that space, sometimes sex is going to happen after that, sometimes not, but definitely scheduling intimacy is huge.
Mm-hmm.
People get so ewed by that. They're like, oh, I have to schedule it. I was just at the therapist the other day, and I thought it was genius. Emily Nagoski, when we were talking to her, Amy, on the show, or she was on our show about her book, Come Together
book. Yeah.
Yeah. And she talked about how scheduling sex sounds like, oh, scheduling sex, right? It's like another thing in your calendar that you look at and you're like, oh, do I have to? Where it's kind of like this dread factor, but you can make it like more playful, where it's not scheduling sex, but it's scheduling playtime, where it's like, oh, that's going to be fun for me and my partner. Or you, as you said, Jordan, scheduling intimacy, which doesn't have to be getting down and like looking deep into each other's eyes, or giving like a massage, or having to do something, but it can be, you can reframe it as this fun experience that doesn't have to be about sex at all. That's helped me with thinking about like going to therapy. I'm like, this is going to be fun for me and my partner to talk about our relationship in a way that will be useful for the future.
That's a good attitude. I like that.
I try. That way I don't have the dread.
Yeah, well, and our mindset is so important too, because you are what you think, right? And so if you can change the way you think about things, that can have a really important outcome on whatever the thing is.
Yeah. Well, created those new neural pathways like zing, zing. So, okay. So I already talked about period sex a little bit, and I think it's important to talk about it, like open the topic a bit more, because it is this dun, 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 period sex. And people go, ew, or people go, I don't mind, or people go, never. And that first episode that Amy and I were together on Sex with Emily Morse, we talked about the Red Wings. Remember, Amy?
Oh, yeah, that story was okay. Please tell this. I think you need to tell the story to start. You have to tell it, even though it was some years ago. Like, you need to tell the story.
Well, I was newly single. I had not been with very many partners. I was in Thailand, and I met this very attractive Scottish man that was significantly younger than me. He was about 27, and I was like 35. Anyway, I had my period, so I thought there was no way possible I'm going to actually hook up with anyone while I'm in Thailand. I was by myself for about 2 weeks, and I was with friends for the other 2 weeks. So I met him, and I just told him, I was like, oh, I have my period. And he was like, okay, yeah, whatever. And I can't do the Scottish accent at this given moment, but I will say that we went out, had some fun, and then we went back to my bungalow, and then he just got right down in there and totally had like Red Wings from going down on me while I had my period. And I was like, I am going to embrace this. This is a new journey for me. And I had no idea that this was a thing. And I really embraced it. And although I was uncomfortable, I was like, I'm probably never going to see you again. And it was super fun. And then I was like, this dude got Red Wings. And that's what I said on the show with Sex with Emily. I was like, that guy was like, freedom. And He got his Red Wings. He earned
This is
the Red Wings.
2017. We were on that show, and she said that. We were all cracking up. And so, April, I just want to add to that your experience inspired with my current partner. I had the IUD for like a couple of years, and I had it removed. And the first time you bleed is like a bleed.
Massive.
And he's totally down with all the feminine juices, bloods, body fluids, whatever. But so that first bleed, he was like getting in there with his mouth and face. I think I was like in the Caribbean on vacation with him, and he took his hands on my pussy and did the mark, the two
war paint, war paint.
Yeah.
He's like,
yeah, with like thick blood on each side. And I was like, fuck yeah, I love this.
That's amazing. It's so funny. All these stories are about vacation. I travel a lot too. And there have been so many times where I'm like, oh, I'm going to be on my period on vacation, so I'm probably not going to do anything. But the reality is, like, that doesn't stop anything a lot of times.
Yeah, I didn't know that at the time. I was playing it like, no, never, nothing's going to happen. I have my period. And I think that like turned the dude on more. He's like, oh, Ah, nice.
Well, I'm probably not used to a dude that would be like, no, you're a woman. And this is something that when you're, like, this is something that's happening to you every whatever. Depends on your cycle, everyone's different. And, I know menopause and then, before we go through puberty, but like, the men or the people that are like, so this is just a part of being intimate with vulva owners are fucking hot.
I have to say though, it's really hot when penis owners embrace it and they do kind of think it's hot, or they do if you're into vulva owning humans and you are hooking up with someone that has their period and you don't go ew, because that's happened to me before where people are like, oh God, it's like you have a disease when you have your period. They're like, no. Like, or you have the cancer. They're like, oh my God. I'm like, Jesus, come on. I just have my period.
Well, there's like so many things that are coming to mind for me. The first thing that I think is that I wanted to mention is I remember when I was like in high school, girls would wear tampons to be like, oh, I'm on my period. And the guys, like this is kind of going a little bit out here, but sometimes the guys would be like, oh, really? Like they didn't believe it, but women were using tampons to avoid sex because they were saying that they were on their period, which is a whole other conversation that we can go down. But so often we do use our period as a reason to not have sex when that is a-okay. And also it can be a really great opportunity to explore and have fun too.
Fuck yeah. I did have a question in there too, but I love that. And I never thought about people using tampons as an excuse. That's not good for you to just have a tampon in there for no reason.
Dry you out real quick, like,
yeah, don't do it. And give you the extra, all the things. So, okay. So obviously we're not trying to convince anyone that's listening or anybody that's listening and doesn't get their period, but are with people that get their periods or anybody in general to have sex while they're on their periods. That's not what this conversation was leading towards. But what I do want to say is, like, what do you think the main hangups are about period sex in general, if you had to guess? And then what do you think the myths and misconceptions are within that?
Yeah, I think the biggest hangup is the mess, right? It's messy. So learning how to manage that mess is probably the best thing that you can do. And I have lots of tips for that. But I think that's the biggest hang up. As far as some myths behind it, I think, that's a great question. None of them are popping up to my head at this very second.
So one would be, you definitely can't get pregnant on the period, which would be like more of a positive fucking on your period. But
that's actually not true. Yeah, that's
not true. It's not true. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, I would imagine that, so like, I've had a partner say this to me right before, not my current partner. Everyone won't say names. April, you know who I'm talking about. He's like, well, it's like period blood is like death, right? It's, you were basically, your body was trying to, you're supposed to get pregnant. It didn't. So it's shedding this aspect of something that is dead and it's coming out of you in this form of blood. And so therefore it's not sex. It's like, wow, my clip boner just died. And also thank you for being an advocate of women. Like I understand that like every month, our bodies are doing things when we're in our cycles to maybe be able to get pregnant, but like that's not all we're fucking doing right here. So like there was something about that. Like basically it's nasty. It's gross. It's disgusting. The actual, fluids themselves are like not something that are designed to be touched or sexy. We're supposed to avoid it at all costs.
Yeah, there was a dude in like high school that said something, and I know Jordan has something to say, but that irked me from the day I met, and I never liked him anyway. But he was like, anything that bleeds for 7 days and doesn't die shouldn't be alive. And I was like, go fuck yourself.
Oh my God.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I bet
he's
like
having the hottest sex of his life now, right now. Just saying. That's sarcasm, everyone.
No.
The other myth that came up for me is that, when we're bleeding, a lot of people think that it's wetter, but actually period blood does dry a lot faster. So using a lubricant is really, really important.
Mm-hmm. So what would your favorite lubricants be? We have our favorites, but for period sex?
So for period sex, so I'm a pure romance fan. That's just kind of what I grew up on. I've always loved them. Just Like Me is always kind of my go-to from them. However, I know Uber Lube is really great. And Uberlube is not condom safe, though. Is that correct?
It is 100% condom safe unless you're using polyurethane, which is like Trojan Supra, but you can use a polyisoprene, which is like Lifestyle's skin.
Which one? The Trojan Supra is polyurethane?
Yes, polyurethane. Apparently, you're not supposed to use silicone with it at all, but you can totally use it with condoms, 100%.
Like latex condoms, any latex condoms, it'll work.
You can use with latex, latex and polyisoprene non-latex. But the issue is the silicone on silicone with sex toys. We have a whole blog about that, y'all, and that's not what this episode is going to be about. But I hear you like. So I'm curious about for both of you. I've had that experience with period sex where we're like I'm having sex with someone who's willing, and it's like, oh, everything feels more juicy, and then all of a sudden you're like, wait, now it feels like all dry and crusty. So add the lube.
Definitely add lube because it just dries up. Like think about, if you're bleeding from your arm, like it clots and dries. And so eventually as it touches the air, like it's just going to dry a little bit faster and become a little bit more like tacky, a little bit different texture.
So let's talk about the like fun, positive things. People that are listening here and they're like, well, you guys are not really selling this period sex game over here. Although April and I were just talking about sexual experiences that were both really hot that involved period sex. So what do you think are some of the positive or even pleasurable aspects of period sex?
Yes, so when it comes to period sex, there's a lot of benefits, especially for the individual bleeding. As far as cramps, it can really help improve cramps. It can help improve mood. So sex all around helps improve mood with all the oxytocins and endorphins that are released, but especially during that time. Also, the way the uterus is placed, it can increase pleasure as well. And so that's where like our bodies are a never-ending source of pleasure, and playing with the different times of the month, different times of everything and all these different scenarios can be so fun because it can feel different than sex at any other time of the month too.
I have a problem with period sex though. For me nowadays, like the first day or two, it's like a no-go zone because the way my cervix, it like drops, I have a shallow vagina, so it can hurt me. And I've tried. And so someone just, if you're listening out there and you're like, I don't know, I haven't had that before, or I'm scared. If it hurts, obviously you want pleasure can be received, but don't do it. And honestly, like I just had period sex. It was like day 3 and it was great. Like there was like heightened sensation, and you have to know, and your partner has to know that there will be a little bit of blood there. So, I mean, there was blood around, but we used a fascinator. The fascinator, like you can use a squirt blanket.
The fascinator throw in black.
Yeah, in black.
Yes, it's the best. Have you tried one yet, Jordan?
I have not tried one, but squirt pads are great for period sex and free bleeding.
So the fascinator throw is designed for like squirting, of course, but it's like still sexy, and so it has like a little almost like, was it like velour or something
it's
on
like
top?
Satin material, or like velvet on one side, but
And you could pour, and so it hides all the. It's also great for anal sex, by the way, because it hides any of the things that might be popping out. And then you could take a whole glass of water. April and I have done this and pour it on it, and it's just fine. If anyone that's listening wants to try one of these, by the way, go to purepleasureshop.com. You get 15% off with coupon code ShamelessSex. And you also, I'll say, you can just use dark towels too, though, right?
Or even the shower is a good option too, but definitely dark towels, dark sheets, to help mask the mess. So maybe you don't see it. Something else that's really, really, really great for the mess is period discs. Are you familiar with those?
Oh yeah. Flex, like that brand?
Yeah. The Flex cup. Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
I meant to grab one before we sat down and record, but the discs are soft. And so they're really, really great because they kind of just collect your period flow up at the top. And so you don't really have the mess. I will tell you, if you are a heavy bleeder and depending on the position, you may still have a mess. Definitely have splattered some walls in my lifetime. But
I love a good crime scene, accidental, consensual crime scene.
Yep. Yeah, but Flex discs or the menstrual discs are a really great way to help control the mess if that's one of the big barriers for you to you and your partners to explore.
Yeah, I think that the Fun Factory has a cup too that they say you can wear during period sex. Like it's a smaller, it looks like almost a strawberry shaped. It's like, I think it's called a Fun Cup. And I remember because I left the company right when they were designing those, and I was one of the test people that tested a bunch of different
test cervix.
Yes. And I can't wear cups, so it didn't work for me. But I know that people say like they could have at least oral, maybe not full penetration, but it could also help. So there's a lot of options for people if they want to have.
There are
Tampons and period sex, not my friend. That damn tampon string just gets in the way.
Well,
Amy's always like, cut it out.
It just dries you out though, right? Like if I'm wearing a tampon and I take it out and then, and again, we're not just talking about penetrative sex, but it just sucked all the moisture out of my body, right? So like and I'm not this is not a podcast about not using tampons, everyone. It's also like not a podcast to convince everyone to have period sex. And I just think that there's like a lot of hangups and misconceptions about like everyone thinks that it's like it can't be a pleasurable time. And it really can if everyone's on board for it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So with like tampons, sometimes you forget to take those out too, which can be a whole nother situation and leads you to come into one of my offices because that's happened. And I've had an office in my living room for a girlfriend before to help a girl out. But the other thing is like with periods, there's so many other ways to manage them too. And so I feel like as I've grown up, the options have expanded so much and there's more body safe options, which is kind of nice too, outside of tampons nowadays.
There are. I'm in my 40s, 41, and I never knew about the discs until Amy and I started our podcast. We would get them sent. I never knew about period underwear because I thought it was only for my hippie friends that just were like free bleeding. And I never knew about a lot of the options. And so I've tried a lot of them. And I honestly feel like since I've switched to using, I don't want to bore people with this, but real quick, I can't use any of the discs or the cups. They just don't work with the way my anatomy is. So I use tampons when I have to, but I use my period panties when I also have to because it's like the one way, but it's like made my cramps better. It's also like made my periods lighter. So, and this isn't about periods, this episode, because it's about pleasure, but I will say that makes me have more pleasure because when I'm cramping and just sitting there with like my heating pad on, when I was only using tampons before, that was gnarly. And it took a little while to adjust, but my body, and I don't know if there's science behind that, but I can speak for myself. And I've heard other friends tell me that there is actual research. They're like, you didn't know like there's so many chemicals in tampons. I was like, well, I assume they bleach the cotton and they do all sorts of things, but I didn't know. So that to me is huge for just my own pleasure. And then other people that have also switched off tampons.
Tampons. I just love when you say that, like a harpoon.
Like harpooning your vagina.
You talked about period panties earlier too, but like those can be so sexy. I love the thong ones. And that's a really great way to just feel sexy when you maybe are menstruating as well. Because sometimes like you don't feel your best, which kind of leads back to the initial topics that we were talking about with if you're not feeling sexy, you're probably not going to want to have sex either. So finding ways to feel sexy, turn yourself on, including period panties. Get yourself a little sexy, silky period panty to prance around in.
Mine weren't sexy, bro. I'm telling you, I tried to make them sexy.
The rest of the outfit that you described, though, damn.
That was in the episode. If anyone wants to hear it, I talked about it. This is the Come Curious episode. Yes, the Come Curious episode. It's not out yet, but it's because it was a whole thing. And I went in. This just happened last Friday, Jordan. That's why it's fresh. Just last Friday. Because I wanted to take the sexy back of the period panties because they can be heinous.
And she took it back. And so on the like the how-tos, because April, you just said this like 2 minutes ago, right? We're not, it might sound like we're just talking about periods. And by the way, I mean, I'll say this for later, but like I don't love the word period for myself. Everyone can say what they want. I have hippie friends that say moon. It's not my word either. I tried the word cycle. I just say bleeding now. I don't care who you are. I'm like, I'm bleeding. Well, no, I won't tell strangers on the street. But coming back to just like incorporating that conversation also with just like when your body is maybe uncomfortable, right? You were talking about endometriosis, all these other things when your body doesn't really feel that good, but maybe you want to be intimate in some way. Like what are some of the fun how-tos for pleasurable sex with these other things that are happening in your body that most people would be like, oh, that's just a no-go now because that's happening?
So I think some fun things is when you're menstruating, this is a really good time to go introspective as well. And so sometimes more connective activities to create pleasure and connection. We talked about oral sex. We talked about some ways to make it like less messy so that we're not thinking about it. But for the most part, I would say like maybe going more like into connection during this phase instead of really focusing on sex.
Damn it.
Yeah.
Focusing on sex. I can't do it anymore. Damn it.
But that's why the whole broadening your definition of sex though, right? Like it, so if my body doesn't feel good, or let me try to be a penis owner for a little bit. Okay, I'm a penis owner. Let's see, I have a penis owner issue. So I have the gases. I'm really gassy. Got the gases. And I ate a big burrito, or maybe I have some sort of whatever. I just like it can feel kind of bloated. I don't feel good and I have a cock. But I still want to connect with my partner in some way that is intimate, right? And so this is that thing we were talking about earlier, the broadening the definition of sex to not just be genital on genital, or maybe even not even like anyone's genitals addressed at all, or maybe just one person's, right? There's so many things possible, right? And you also can have gassy sex. That's fine. I've tooted on a tongue before. It was an accident. Sorry, not sorry.
Well, and I mean, this would be a great time to like maybe do some bubble baths. I am like a sensual girl. I love the sensual sensation side of things. So hot tubs and bubble baths and candles and just connecting in other ways if you're not feeling up to it, because sometimes you are or you are not going to want period sex. I know I don't like to have period sex at the beginning of my period because it's too heavy and that just doesn't feel good for me. But when it's lighter, I'm more comfortable with it. And so there are some nuances and also playing with it. Like you don't necessarily know until you try. And so you have to explore what you do and do not like in order to get a better comprehension of like what is a yes and what is a no as well.
I think that's great advice, Jordan. And I remember a few years ago, one of my good friends came to me asking me a question about, she was like, hey, do you have any advice? Like every time I do it doggy style, it's just like a certain point, it hurts so much. Do you have any advice? What should I do? Like my partner loves doggy style and I love it for him, but it just feels really uncomfortable for me. And I was like, well, do you know if you're about to get your period? Because your cervix drops right before that. And then when you bleed, things start to move in different, it fluctuates and there's movement. And she was like, oh, and then she reported back to me a couple of months later. She's like, you were right. As long as we honored like my cycle, I can have doggy style and I love it. And now they have 2 kids, I think, and they live in Delaware. I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. So shout out to her, but that was
Delaware is a very
story.
sexy state.
You know what? She lived in Santa Cruz first. Yeah. But yeah.
It's super true. The cervix changes positions, which can have a huge impact on pleasure all throughout the cycle. And so it's not just period related. It could be at any time too.
That was like where my question lies with him, because people are so different. There's so many people out there. And this podcast, hopefully we do our best to cover so many topics that will speak to people no matter who they are, if they're menstruating, if they're not, if they're with a partner that menstruates, if they aren't, if they're single, let's hone in on advice, because you have Vaginas, Vulvas, Vibrators podcast, and you also have experience working in this world with folks. So what is your top advice for people in partnerships with those women, those vulva owners who are still menstruating? And what are the ways that they could support their partners, especially if they've never bled before, if they're like dudes?
Yeah. So two things. I think one is vulva owners learning their body's patterns. And one of the best ways to do that is maybe keep like a journal or a diary of some sort to track it and see, okay, is there anything that I notice in common? When I'm ovulating, this is what I see. When I'm menstruating, this is what I see. These are my experiences. So that you can kind of track those patterns, but then also open communication with your partners about this as well, so that they know in all of my relationships, they know where I am in my menstrual cycle, because it affects my mood so greatly. Like I will really primarily only record podcasts during certain times of my cycle because of the fact that, yes, I'm ovulating this week. That yes.
Lucky. Chip,
Yes.
side note, we need to start doing that.
Amy, I think there's been a ton of times where you don't want to record with me because I've been such a see you next Tuesday.
But we're actually pretty synced up now too. Like you started bleeding yesterday, I started bleeding today. That's cool.
Word.
Yeah, you have room in your life to, to clear space because this is something that is happening in your life. And then society is like, you should just move through it. And then if you have partners, they're like supportive of that, is my guess.
Yes. So I had a guy friend who called me the other day, and his girlfriend is synced up to me. And he had said, where are you in your cycle? And I'm like, oh, luteal phase. He's like, oh, okay. So I won't ask her any questions right now because I know the answer is no. Because he follows me a lot and he just knows that like that's how it is for me. And that is how it's been for his girlfriend as well. But learning those patterns. So once the individual experiencing it knows their patterns, they can vocalize it. And so I think that, they can also help be like, if you are a partner of somebody that is menstruating, you can help identify those patterns. Obviously, the way you approach that has to be with caution because you don't want to just be like, you are a bitch all the time right before you start your period. That's not going to go over well. But if you approach it in a way that says like, hey, I noticed that you feel really stressed before your period. What can I do to help you? Or is there something that, how can I support you? That conversation is going to go very differently. And so I think it just comes down to really learning your patterns and talking about it.
So my partner went to a men's group thing like a weekend, and it was like 65 men learning how to like embrace vulnerability and all these things and that are wonderful. And I think a lot of men in at least the US could use this. Anyways, not a sales point for that because we're not sponsored by them. But one of the men there, the advice was, if you have a partner, because they have apps now, right, for menstrual cycles, for bleeding, get on the same app so you can track your partner's cycle to know when to show up in a certain way. And so I'm going to bring this full circle to April and I. Chip, we should share one of those so we know how to be more supportive of each other when we're not synced up.
That's so funny, Amy, that you say that, because the other night I was stressing out because my period, whatever, this is not about me and my period. So I was stressing out. I was reading all of the period apps available, and my partner he's sitting next to me and he's like, why aren't you watching this movie? It's so good. And I was like, you don't understand what I have to deal with sometimes. And he's like, well, what are you doing? I was like, you know what? You've already seen this part of this film. We were watching the thing about actually the Black Panthers, the Black Panther party, and he'd already seen the first episode and I was really into it, but I couldn't watch it. And so I was like, you've already seen this. Why don't you select from these 5 apps that I've been reading about which period app I should select? Ooh. So he did, and he selected it. And now I have that. It's called, we're not sponsored by them, by the way, but it's called Femble.
Can you add him to it and like share so he can see it?
I believe so, but I don't know. I just started using it for this first cycle, but that was because I was like, yo, which one would you pick? And so he did. He read it. He was like on it for 45 minutes reading each
You're
one.
like, this is not just my burden to share, which is true, right?
It's funny that you say that, Amy, but yeah, I'll share all the schedules with you. But yeah, Jordan, if you have anything to add to that, that's just my life. That was just recent.
I think that's a great idea, sharing your period apps to help. And if you're not tracking your cycle as a menstruating individual, highly recommend that, because everything we do is very correlated to those hormones. And so it can be so insightful about when you want to have sex, how you want to have sex, how you want to connect. And it can give you so much insight to have more pleasure in your life when you understand your menstrual cycle. Yeah, it's highly recommend. The app that I use, I believe, is In the Flow. It's a paid app, but it also talks about more in depth how to work around your cycle and how to connect with other people. Like it goes into all of these things because we could go down a whole rabbit hole of that, but
that one's In the Flow. In the Flow. Mm-hmm. I got to remember that. Okay. Cause I selected the one he went with. So I didn't really go much more deep into that, but maybe I should go to
April after this. We should see if we can, I'll try to add the same thing. And if we can share them with each other. And then like for the 3 days before we start bleeding, we're like, oh, Chip, I love you so much. Like, how can I support you and help you? And do you need like a shoulder rub today? And then if we're both synced, we're like, who's gonna do it first? I'm just kidding. I like this. I like this plan. I like this plan. Okay, so we need to wrap this up soon, everyone, and I just want to say thank you for everyone who is listening and staying tuned, because I know that even for people that bleed or have periods or moons or whatever you call them, can be an uncomfortable conversation because society has told us that you should go in the red tent and no one should know, blah blah blah. And if you're people that appreciate vulvas and women and you're staying in tune with this, then please go and give yourself a big fucking high five, no matter what your gender is, and be like, fuck yeah. And we just really appreciate folks who want to learn about all the aspects of sexuality, including something that we're talking about, the myths and misconceptions, like the things that people think shouldn't be sexual is not sexual. And I know went down like the period rabbit hole, and I think it's an important hole to go down. Ooh, see what I did?
Yeah, and Amy, I think it's just as important as like we had an episode on hemorrhoids and
yeah.
bowel movements, which isn't sexy at all, but it's all related. This is all part of humanity and being a human on planet Earth. Even if you don't bleed, it's still part of other people. And if you are in contact with other human beings, they are, or they have, or they will, or right. And everybody poops. So there you go.
And sex doesn't always involve genitals. And so, some genitals have hemorrhoids, some genitals bleed. So let's just be honest about that, and lovingly honest. So I know that this conversation was quite limited. And I know you, Jordan, you have a whole podcast on this and 20 times more. So how can people find you, work with you, find your podcast, all the things, learn more about vaginas, vulvas, vibrators, and Jordan?
Yes. So best place to find me is on Instagram at Jordan Donnell. And then my podcast, Vaginas, Vulvas, Vibrators, you can find that anywhere you listen to podcasts, Apple, Spotify, you name it, it's on there. So check me out.
How often do you release an episode?
Right now it's bi-weekly.
Nice.
Bi-weekly.
Okay. So
Damn.
you have to practice, because if you're gonna bleed, you're like, I can't record right now. I'm
exactly.
going to TikTok. I love
Except
that.
for that 1
I love
week.
that for you. I think that's genius. Let's
We
all
might try to do that.
embrace
We'll see what we can do over
I know.
here
We'll
on our
embrace
end.
our inner Jordan and figure it out.
I love
Inspiring. April and I are working on just like after we get back from business trip, just not going right to work the next day. So we're going to focus on that one now, and then next step will be to actually work with our cycles, which I think would also be, I'm not joking about that, is quite smart and brilliant, and just being a respecting your own body, psyche, mind, heart, all the things.
Right. Which is why we love anyone that's listening right now. We would love you. We appreciate you. I know this episode, hopefully you've made it to this far and it's important to you on some level. Check out Jordan's podcast because it's amazing. We were on it and I love your vibe, Jordan. You do such a good job helping people and you're helping a lot of people. So thank you for the work you're doing. Check out Vaginas, Vulvas, and Vibrators. Not Volvos, everyone. That's the car. It's Vulvas. And by now, you should know it's the inner part of the vagina is the inner part. The outer part's the vulva. And vibrators, well, those could go inside or outside depending on what you want. So check out all the things. Jordan, any last words before we bid you adieu?
No, thank you so much for having me and talking with you guys. This has been such a fun conversation.
Yeah. And I'm going to leave you with that's my favorite vibrator. That's a vibrator
noise. Is that
noise.
the sound of a mouth on a bleeding pussy, or is that the sound of a vibrator on a pussy?
It's kind of like the sound of one hand clapping, Amy. It's up to you. Okay. So to all of our listeners out there, we love you. I want to motorboat the shit out of all of you like right now. So we'll see you next Tuesday. If you haven't rated us, I'm not going to motorboat you. I'm taking my motorboat away from you. Watch us on YouTube, but I'm not because I love you all. And we'll see you next Tuesday. Ciao for now.